think quirky, you think weird and wonderful, but in fact, ultimately, nature always makes sense. I learned a lot of fun things, and the fun things, those sparkly, surprising things, are a key ingredient when it comes to our storytelling. When early life was feeding, it did so, it had essentially one opening, call it a mouth if you like. So you're taking food in, you're digesting it, but then you've got to spit it back out. Now that's not advantageous. Once it's full of food, you can't eat anymore. You've got to stop feeding. An enormous quantum leap in evolution came when we had the through gut. And that meant that you could eat continuously, which meant that you could take on nutrients far more efficiently. When you've got a mouth, that's where the food's going in, you want to maximize your capacity to find that food. So that could be taste, could be a nose, could be eyes. If you're going to process it with the brain, you want the brain as close to the eyes, nose, mouth as you possibly can, which means all of a sudden you've got a head, but you've only got the head because you've got the arse. So without an arse, we would never have had a head. And I love that. It's plain common sense. No arse, no head. In this series, what we've done is we've chosen an iconic animal to carry a narrative. We start with a question about that animal, and we follow an evolutionary process which allows us to answer that question at the end. We start in one of our programs with an ostrich egg. And we go back and we explore the evolution of reproduction, because initially, cells were just cloning themselves. They were budding, they were just splitting. So you had two identical clones, nothing was going to change. And it was only when the first sex occurred that you could essentially get mixing, and then life could begin to diversify. And ultimately, we follow this all the way through the evolution of the egg. So we bring all this together, and we've gone from, cells that have been cloning to this egg. And at the end of the program, the ostrich egg hatches. With that little ostrich that sits on my hand, the key message there is that amongst every organism ever, that is unique. There will never be another organism the same as that in the entire history of the universe. That makes life inordinately precious. We can't waste life. You can look at a snail and think, why would the snail be both male and female? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But from the snail's point of view, of course, it's a real bonus. It means that you can be providing sperm and eggs at the same time, which means that through every mating, you've got double the capacity to get your genes into the next generation. The more interesting question is, why aren't we hermaphrodites now? Some, species have the capacity to change their sex through their life. So some mollusk will start female and become male, and fish the same. So yeah, you think quirky, you think weird and wonderful, but in fact, ultimately, nature always makes sense. These army ants that we were working with, there's a caste of those which are well equipped with very large mandibles, and they are essentially the soldiers, and their job is to protect the column of moving ants. So I'm lying down alongside this river of ants, and of course they find me, and I'm immediately enemy number one. What you see on the screen, those were the gentle ant bites. I quite enjoy the challenge of being able to do the piece without going like that, What never made the screen were the most painful of those ant bites, and those were the ones where they got in my armpit, like two ants biting my armpit like mad. We go to film the dolphins. I had a tool which was like a sort of an underwater scooter which fascinated them. I looked down and I had a dolphin immediately underneath me. And then I looked up and they were above me. And it was as if I was being escorted through this crystal clear water by my own sort of personal pod of dolphin bodyguards. And I could hear them all clicking and talking to one another. And I can't tell you, it was one of the most remarkable things that has ever happened in my life. We have a story to tell. So we sit down and we think, how do we want to tell that story? What's our beginning, middle and end? And then how are we going to populate that story with interesting things to engage our audience, which will also help carry our narrative? And when we finally decided on our cast of characters, we have to look at which of those are realistic, which of those can we actually find and go and film on locations. Then we look at where can we go and find that assemblage of species. And these days, we're filming these in one location. We've got a carbon footprint to consider, so we're flying to one location and we have to find everything there. And that's when people get on the phone and they start ringing round, because nothing beats local knowledge. And it's not just local knowledge about a species, it can be about individuals of that species. And all of these animals have personalities and characters, which means that they will behave in a different way. We've decided that Ben the orangutan is the animal that we want in our story to carry the narrative, and everything will fit. And we've spoken to someone who knows Ben as well as you can know an orangutan. And the most likely time for him to be there is between 8 and 9 in the morning. And ultimately, that's when we turn up. And we have just got to bank on the fact that he's got his watch on and he turns up on time. I'd love the ears of the bat. They hear in the ultrasonic. Trying to imagine living in that world with that capacity of hearing is beyond my comprehension. It's a bit like when I take my dogs for a walk. I'd give anything to have their nose for 5 minutes. Can you imagine being out in the woods with the nose of a dog? It would be phenomenal. And flying at night with the ears of a bat, I'd take that. Certainly historically, the creatures that it was harder for us to get to know were those which developed, the sort of lore. So because bats are nocturnal and they're hard to get hold of, they were a creature that led to all sorts of vampiric and Draculine stories. And so when I was a kid, I was really massively into bats, and I'd seen these Honduran bats. So yeah, when I heard the bats were there, I was so excited. And we went along and we held a mirror underneath the leaf, and I gazed into the mirror, and that young Chris that was reading his bat books, aged 6 or something, just lit up. That's pretty special. Brilliant to see them. You could be supremely arrogant, couldn't you? There are certain world leaders at this point who would say that they would be Luca. This is a cell from which every living organism on this planet at this point in time is related to. Every bird, every plant, every fungi is related to this cell. That is not Chris Packham, there's no doubt about that. I'd like to be that little worm that got an arse. I'd be the formation of the arse. When we're making programs like this, we want to put the very best on screen. It's all about the logistics, the planning, putting together a story that's going to work. The one thing, of course, that we can never control is the weather. If you go to a rainforest, it's in the name. It's going to be raining. It could be hard work. We're a relatively small team. Part of the joy of my job is that I carry the tripod. It's about everyone mucking in, and sometimes we're scrambling up mountains or wading across rivers. We don't live in an all sunny, blue sky world. The crew that I'm fortunate to work with are exceptional, really driven. And ultimately what that will mean is that they will say that we've got to get up at 2:30 in the morning. No one's going to say no. If that's what they think is going to get the best shot, then we are going to do it. And they'll say, do you mind doing one more? And I'll do 10 more for those people. And it's a pleasure to do it again, because our role is to make sure we get it right for everyone. It's just such a privilege to work with those people. Science is exciting, it's creative, it's imaginative. Science is fun. Having a sense of humour is a great way of engaging. Part of that, is that sometimes we can lark about a bit. That we had this huge crate with a skull in it. We came up with this idea of tying some rope to it, and I would drag it along the beach. This was conceived, as ever, the night before. And at that point, I hadn't appreciated just how heavy the trunk was. I think I dragged that box about 2 miles along that beach that morning, I mean, extinction is a key part of evolution. We get very upset about things becoming extinct, and I think that's warranted if we've driven that extinction. There's no doubt about that. You know, life is dynamic. Not everything works. And ultimately, if things didn't become extinct, there wouldn't be enough room for new things. 99% of all of the creatures that have ever lived on this planet are extinct, and without that, stat, then we wouldn't have the 1% which are currently here, and they are wonderful. What I'm appalled by is the fact that we as a sentient, conscious species are driving extinction, and that's what compels me to try and get people to think twice about the impacts that they're having, and to try and look for opportunities to be part of a solution rather than continuing part of the problem. If you care about life, if you are inspired by and excited by our stories, then please do everything you can to look after it. It's taken millions, indeed billions of years to get here. We really shouldn't waste it. To find out more about all of this fascinating life on Earth, all you've got to do is click on the link below, BBC Earth Science, and subscribe to that fantastic channel.